Hi, I'm Robert Joseph, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this swim brief, or it can be underwear as well. Now, I call this the stealth brief, and I don't know why, really. It is pattern number 48. It is similar to my underwear, my pouch brief, but there are a couple of differences. So the first difference that right away is that it has a rollover waistband. So I put the elastic on and then I roll it over to the inside. And there is a buttonhole here, and I take you through that step as well during the tutorial. Now in the front has a slightly lower pouch, and I give you a little bit more room for those that need it. If you don't need it but you like the lower pouch, just shave off a little bit around the curved area and you should be fine. It's also, I cut here at an angle. It's approximately about the same angle as the pouch brief, but it gives you a little bit more options for being more fun with using different fabrics and things like that. So it has a slightly more narrow waist area around the leg and the waist here, and then it turns into, I'm sorry for the camera shaking, I'm having trouble with my mic. So it has a more slight and curved area here around the rear to actually cup your goods a little bit better. So just be aware of that. Now I do also, I should have left that in the back. If I'm turning this around without shaking the camera too much. I do actually have a slightly higher area here in the back, so there's a little bit more coverage up here on the top so it won't slide down as you're walking around. As some of my other briefs actually are cut much lower, have a much lower rise for the back. There is no center back seam, so you will be cutting that area on the fold. So there's not much else to it. You know how it goes for most of my videos. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. And now, with enough of me talking, let's just get into cutting this thing out and getting it sewn up. Okay, so we're ready to start getting sewing to put this together. Now, in the cutting out video that I sped up, I was pointing to these areas on the pattern, and you should always kind of keep this part of the pattern handy. And I wrote the number and the style on this so I won't lose it. So this has the waist measurements of the size that you're making. And then the second amount of measurements down here is the waistband. And in this case, on this suit, we're using 1 inch wide. And then below that is the leg opening elastic, and I use 3/8 wide elastic, and you're going to cut 2 of those. So that's what I was pointing to. So for now I can set that aside. We're not at the elastics yet. So I'm also going to set the back aside, and we're just going to be working with the fronts. So I can put the pattern away, don't lose that. So fold it back up and put it in the envelope if you've cut things out. Okay, so I have the front pouch here, which is, this is the fashion fabric, and in my videos I tend to say face side for the right side of the fabric because I don't want to get the right side of the body mixed up with the right side of the fabric. So if I say face side, that's what it means. So what you're gonna do, and notice I cut them out with the face sides together, so I really wouldn't have to realign them, but I've done that anyway. And then I also cut out a lining, and it's a good idea to line your front pouch just in case some of the dyes and the synthetic fabric here can be kind of rough. Just so it doesn't irritate your skin. And so I use this lining, it's called Helenca, Helenca, or you can use another nylon soft fabric to line your pouch. Lining is optional, but I always do that. So lining the back, I quit lining the backs in my videos because the lining adds to the weight. If you're going to be swimming in the fabric, the lining may cause the fabric to drag behind you. So that's why I quit putting linings in the back. But of course you can line it, you just need to cut one out of the back of the lining. So in my previous videos, I like to stack the lining on top of the fashion fabric pieces, and that's what I'm going to do here. Of course you can sew them separately. What we're going to do is we're going to sew around the center front here. If you do them separately, then I would suggest tacking them at the seam line down here at the bottom so that when you're in the water, you're moving around, the two don't come apart on you. Because if you're moving around and the lining and the suit is doing 2 different things, sometimes that's uncomfortable. So I'm going to grab my pins, and I think these look good, so I'm just going to carefully lay the lining pieces on top of the fashion fabric here. And everything looks pretty well lined up. So I'm just going to pin this, and I'm going to pin this going this way because I think I'm going to be sewing on the other side. And a lot of times in the videos I forget to do this. So I want to say one thing about pinning. In my other videos, my newer videos, I've switched out to these clips, and I get these at Waywalk. So I don't get paid by them to say that, but this is actually a pretty good deal. So I've used these clips, which I think in the previous video I said that these clips are great because if you forget which direction you're going to be sewing in, you don't have to readjust the pins when you're at the machine. So that's what I'm going to do now, because I'm going to be sewing on the other side. So what I'm going to be doing is, this is the way it's going to go in the machine. I'm going to start here at the bottom, and I'm going to sew all the way up here with my serger overlock. And I will meet you over there. Okay, so we have the front pouch done along the center front seam, and one thing that I wanted to mention, I was thinking about it as I was sewing. I always put the lining down where the feed dogs are because the lining is really stretchy. So your linings for your swimsuits should really be stretchier than your actual shell fabric, your fashion fabric. And so because this stretches so much, I want the feed dogs to keep it from stretching out along this seam. So most machines have a differential feed, meaning that the top and the bottom kind of feeds more evenly. So just keep an eye on that, and that's why I put the lining on the bottom next to the feed dogs. Okay, so now what we're going to do is let's open this up, and we can see what the front looks like, right? And I want to make sure that I have the lining folded over too. So your inside should look like this, and your outside should look like this. Okay, and that center front seam should actually be enclosed here. So just be aware of that. So one of the things that I want to do now is before I move on, we're going to do two things right now before we attach it to the body. And that is we're going to actually baste stitch around here. This is part of the leg opening. Right here, we're going to do that on both sides, and then of course you can do up here, but it's such a short width that we won't really need to worry about that. But I want to make sure that this lining doesn't move around, so I'm just going to stay stitch that really quick, not stay stitch, but we're just going to baste stitch that along this area. Okay, so we have that basted here at the leg opening, and you can probably see the stitching a little bit better that way. So just be careful not to stretch this out. Now when you feel that there's probably going to be some tension on that thread, and that's fine, we can pick this out later, so don't worry about that if it's not stretching. So this will help you with your elastic when we're putting the elastic on. It'll just keep everything together a lot nicer. So now one more thing before we start attaching this to the body is we need to work on the buttonhole, and I forgot to bring over my ruler. Okay, so I have my rulers, and this is a clear see-through ruler. I'm not sure if you can actually see that, that I've actually put a piece of painter's tape on because sometimes it's hard to see. So of course I'm using like a bluish fabric, but that's okay. So I have my elastic here, and I'm putting a 1-inch elastic on this. So we're going to put it like that, and then it's going to be turned over. So you will need to decide if you want the opening for the drawstring on the outside or on the inside. I'm going to put it on the inside, and I'm just going to do one little buttonhole, and that's how we do it now, how I normally do it. Now you could use the elastic for this, but I'm going to actually use the ruler because these are 1 inch. I just got a couple. This is a smaller 6-inch, and this is a 12-inch. And either one, I just usually put it here, and let's see, I think I'm going to put it on this side, and I just put a pin. Now sometimes I'll mark it with a pen or something, an erasable pen, and that's all I need the rulers for. The reason this is important is because I need to put the buttonhole between the pin mark and the edge. Now when I sew the elastic on here, I have about a 1/4 inch stitch width, so we want to kind of be within these two areas. So this is my pin for the fold over, and that's where it will be folded like that. So I need to put another pin, and this will come out in the before I sew. And then I'm just going to put it here in the middle. This is about where the buttonhole is. Now on my larger front swimsuits, there's we don't have to worry about the edge here, but I do have a seam here, so I'm going to probably push it over closer a little bit to this seam when I do that, and you'll see me do it in the next step. But one thing I do want to mention is that, and I think I mentioned this in all of my videos that I do swimwear for when we're talking about drawstrings, buttonholes for drawstrings, is that the sewing machine doesn't like this fabric because it's elastic. So the feed dogs just like don't pull it through, it just stretches it, and so you just get this glob of thread. So what I do, and what I've done in previous videos, is I've used some rip away, which is lightweight embroidery backing. But in this case, some of you don't have an embroider machine, so you can just use a piece of paper, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just ripping a couple short pieces, and I like to do the top and the bottom. Now, the one thing that you might find with a piece of paper is the feed dogs don't like to grab this, so test it out first. I think my machine will be okay, but we'll find out. I'm not going to test this first. The nice thing about the rip away, and I have some right here, if I don't knock everything over. So it comes on a roll like this, or you can get pre-cut pieces. And what it is, it's just a lightweight fabric that you actually can just rip away after you're done. So understand this is kind of expensive, so use it sparingly. But the nice thing about this that's a little bit different than the regular paper is that it has some texture to it. So it's probably a little bit easier for the feed dogs to grab onto it. But we're going to test out the paper and see how that works. So what I do is when I get it in the machine, I put the piece underneath, and this is where this would be the feed dogs, and then I also like to put one on top, and that just assures that there's nothing is going to stretch, that it's actually going to sew a really nice buttonhole. So we'll check that out, and I'll come back and we'll discuss how that came out. Okay, so we have the buttonhole done, and personally I think I like the rip away a little bit better. It's thinner than the paper. That's just a personal preference, but if you don't have the rip away, the paper seemed to work fine. Just go slow. So I'm turning up the threads, and then when you rip this away, what I would do is I would hold on here. You don't want to just pull it apart because you might pull the stitches out. So just rip up into like the corner part of it, and then hold on, you know, with your fingernail and by those stitches, and just carefully rip around without, you know, pulling out those stitches. And it should come out. So that came out pretty good. And then when we open this later, that paper on the inside will probably go away. So, one's hanging on here. All right. So there we go, and it's there, and we can actually check. Let's see, where'd my elastic go? Here's my elastic. So if I put my elastic here, this is how I'm sewing the elastic on. That's the width. So if I turn it over, that's going to be well, you can see that, well onto the inside. Okay, so that's pretty good. So now we can move on. I'm going to move these papers out of the way because we're going to actually stitch this to the back and side part. I always put the back and the sides together, so your pattern will say the back. I don't know where I'm going with my rip away. Okay, so I'm going to bring the back piece in. Kind of move this over here. I don't need to worry about that right now. I think I'll have my clips ready though. Okay, so this is the back piece. And we open it up, and this is what it looks like. Isn't this a fun print? It has sparklies on it. I think it's a lot of fun. So these are the side pieces that we need to match to. So this is our front. We're going to match face side to face side, and we're going to actually match up our notches. Now I made really big notch cuts here on the side, but if you see here, now of course you could have basted down here, but it's such a short area, I didn't really need to. So make sure that you're getting the pouch side down here. This is the inseam, or the crotch, which is going to be attached here later on. But we need to go face side to face side, and we're just going to match up these sides. And I'm just going to match up to where that notch is. Just the cut edges. And I'm going to use my clips, clip here at the bottom, and then up here at the top. Now I want to say, if there's, this keeps falling out of my hand. Okay, now if you're worried about something that looks like this, I don't know if I can get that in the camera, where there's a little point that sticks out here, don't worry about that too much, because the seam allowances line up to where the fabric meets right at the edge, where it's even, and that's actually the edge of the seam allowance. So that's the way the pattern is supposed to be. Now I'm going to do these at the same time. So this is the back. I'm just going to pull my other side. And I pull this over here, just match up this side, and so I'll be able to sew these at the serger at the same time. Okay, one more. And again, with the clips, it doesn't matter which way I'm going to sew it. I usually like to go from the bottom, wherever the bottom is of the seam, up to the top. So that's what I'm going to do. So just going to run over to the serger and get those sewn up. Okay, so we have this stitch to the body, the back and the sides, basically it's all in one. And let's just have a really quick look at what those seams look like, just really quickly. So there are the seams, and so that looks really nice, and of course this is going to be turned under an inch, and then we'll have elastic here. Now we just need to do the inseam or the crotch, depending on the words you prefer. So here, now we could have done this while I did these side front angled seams here, but sometimes when you have them clipped together like I had them here, and then also this, it's kind of weird to handle. So I just wanted to do it one step at a time. So now all we have to do, if you remember to cut out your notches, match your notches, and your edges should match. And I'm just going to clip these in place. And gonna go right over to the serger and stitch this across. Okay, so I've got the inseam crotch seam done, and now I'm actually ready to work with the elastics, but I just decided, I don't usually do this, I just decided all of a sudden that I'm going to do some top stitching. So I'm going to turn this inside, right side out, actually face side out. And these two seams now, on a lot of sporty swimsuits, you'll see that it has top stitching here on these two seams, and these are really short seams. So the way I like to do the top stitching is you have to decide which side you want the seam allowance, and I'm going to put the seam allowance toward the center front. So I'm going to hold those toward the center front, and then I'm going to top stitch here. I'm going to use my cover stitch. So I'm also going to use the cover stitch when I roll over the waistband and the elastic. But now anywhere I use the cover stitch, you can use a zigzag stitch. Just be aware of that, and I'll probably reiterate that again. So now if your cover stitch machine doesn't like the thicknesses, like these little areas, you can again put some paper underneath them where the feed dogs are, to help it through, or use the rip away. Now sometimes with these short seams you pull it out and it will unravel, so just be careful that when you pull it out of your machine you hold on to those stitches while you pull the threads out. You'll see me do that. I'm not going to really walk you through that on this part. I've done cover stitching before. It's just another type of top stitching. So one exception to your zigzag is that you can actually look at your seam allowance on your zigzag, whereas the cover stitch you do not. You actually see the top or the face side of your fabric. So I'm going to do this top stitching really quick, and then I'll be back and I will talk to you about the elastics. Okay, so just a note, and I should have put a message up on the screen, is that I changed my mind. I did not fold the seam allowance toward the front. I actually folded it away from the center front. I think it looks better. So that is my top stitching, and then of course I'll have the same top stitching on the waistband and then the leg openings. So now I want to talk to you about the elastics. Okay, so we are ready to prepare the elastic, and for this I'm using a 1 inch wide elastic. And I've cut the length that I've needed. So just make sure that you have your amounts here that you need to cut. So here are the size ranges and then the amount of elastic that you need to cut. So I'm doing a medium, so I've cut 32 inches. And so what I like to do is get the length of the elastic, and on either ends, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark my stitch line, and I've got a marking tool and a ruler. And I'm just going to put the ruler at the 1/2 inch mark on either side. And I'm actually marking on the same side of the elastic. So notice that these marks are on the same side of the elastic. You can see that. Where am I going with the... Okay, they're on the same side. And so when I come around, I make a loop, and I'm stacking them right on top of each other, on top of that line. And you want to make sure that you don't get any kind of twists in the elastic, otherwise you'll have to rip it out and do it over again. So just make a loop and overlap on top of those lines. And if you like, you can pin it either way. Before you get to the machine, you can pin it like that, or you can pin it like this, and that's fine. So now I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch right across this line to make it secure. Okay, so I've got the elastic band, elastic loop all sewn together, and it's nice and secure. Now just double check again all the way around the loop that you don't have any twists in it. So what we need to do now is we need to divide this into 4 equal parts. So I like to fold on my stitch line like this and go all the way to the other side. And now you can pin this. I'll go ahead and do both ways. I'm just going to take my pen, this is erasable marker, and I mark the opposite side, and then I take that marking and I match it up to my stitch line. And I've got that matched, and then on either one of these, on both of these ends actually, I'm going to mark here. I'm going to put this up like this and then just mark both sides. Of course, it would help if I had, you know, a larger marker, but I just like to do this because then I don't have to deal with so many pins. But I'm going to go ahead and do that for you anyway. So I've got this all divided into fourths, and I'm just going to go ahead and put a pin in here. And we can actually use these same pins to pin it to the garment as well. And just so you can see that I will have 4 equal parts. Got that one pinned. Okay. So now I have my stitch end. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts. And now, okay, so leg opening elastic. The elastic that I use usually predominantly in any kind of swimwear is this elastic it's by Dritz. I don't get paid for any of these companies that I tell you about. This is just what I buy. And I buy I use 3/8 inch wide. I usually normally always use that width on the leg opening. So 3/8 wide cotton swimwear elastic. And what this is basically rubber wrapped in cotton, and it holds up in both the chlorine and in the sea salt in the ocean water a lot better than something that isn't wrapped in cotton. Cotton kind of protects the rubber that's in there. So this is what I predominantly use in my leg opening areas. Okay, so I've cut the elastic, the 2 elastics for my leg opening, the length that I need. And so what I'm going to do on each of the ends, there are 2 here, so I'm going to mark off a 1/2 inch. You can do more if you want, but I think a 1/2 inch is fine. So you can use, I have a couple of different colors of erasable markers, so let's see if the red one is going to work. Sometimes these dry out. So I'm just going to mark a 1/2 inch here. There we go, there's one. A 1/2 inch. And then make sure your markings are on the same side of the elastic. And this is basically the same as what we did with the waistband. Okay, so I've got those marked. Now you want to make sure that you don't get any twists in these. So I'm going to bring these around. I'm going to lay those marks right on top of each other. Okay, and I don't have a clip. I'm going to grab one of those really quick. But you can just pin it or clip it together just to hold it there. We're going to go over to the machine and stitch right across that line. I'm going to do the same thing with this. There are actually 2 ways you could stitch this, and I'll show you on each of them. Sometimes a zigzag kind of pulls out. What I'm talking about is there's one way where you can just stitch straight across here using a straight stitch, or you can zigzag across the entire section of the overlap part. Okay, so I'll do one zigzag and one straight stitch. Okay, so we have the leg opening elastic sewn together in circles. You know, it's just a loop. And just make sure again that you don't have any twisties. So I showed you 2 ways. You could sew straight across the elastic, or you could zigzag the length of the overlap. So you decide which is going to be best for you. It doesn't really matter because these are going to be covered with overlocking, and then it's going to be turned to the inside anyway. So now to prepare the rest of the elastic. So if you've done it, if you stitched it like this, you're just going to fold on that seam to fold everything in half. Now you can either mark it with the pen like this, or you can use a pin. So usually when I'm making these, I just, when I'm making any kind of underwear or swimwear, I just mark it with the pen. So then I'm going to take that marking and I'm going to match it back up to my original mark, and then I'm going to fold it in half. I'm going to mark both ends of these with either the pen or the pin. So I'm going to go ahead and use pins. I'm going to do both for you, so there's no confusion about what you need to do. And you're going to do this for both of the loops. That makes it easy. I see that mark, and then I can just put a pin like this on both sides. And what we're doing is dividing it into fourths. And then we will repeat this step once we get to the garment. So there's the one, and then we're going to do the other one. So if you've done it with the zigzag, this made the seam a little bit thick right here. So just find your marking, fold it on that marking line just like we did before, and mark the opposite side with a pen or a pin. Your clips won't really work for this because you're going to, once you get this onto the garment, you're going to actually be stretching it. So again, you're going to take this mark and match it up to the original fold mark there. And then again, you have these 2 sides that you're going to mark and pin. Mark on both sides. And I'll put pins so that when we get to the garment, you'll be able to see very clearly where you need to match. Okay, and put a pin in this one. Okay, so there we have both our leg openings marked. We don't really need one here because we can see exactly where that mark is. Okay, so that's it to the elastic preparation. Let's get to back to the garment. Okay, so we're back with the suit, and I've got the elastics already, and I think I got my camera aligned a little bit better so you can, I'm a little bit closer to the table. Okay, so just a little bit of a disclaimer. The two videos, or the videos that you watched before of the elastic, those are just regular videos that I made that I use for all of my videos now for the leg opening elastic and for the waist elastic. So I was repeating myself a lot, and I thought, well, I can just can those and just put those in the videos to make it a little bit quicker for me to get these videos out to you. So the process is the same. Just if you're worried if the elastics look a little bit different than what I used than what you're seeing, the process is the same. Basically, you're making a loop, you're dividing the loop into fourths, and then we're going to do the same thing on the garment. And I'm going to do that here now. So this is the leg opening, and you could go ahead and do the waist elastic if you want, but I like to get the harder stuff out of the way, and the leg opening elastic is a little bit more challenging. So what we're going to do, like I said before, we're going to divide the leg opening into fourths. And I'm actually going to use the crotch seam, this seam, as my first folded edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that. It's going to fold right onto the seam, onto itself. And then I'm very carefully I'm not stretching anything, very carefully just matching the cut edges all the way along. And it doesn't have to match perfectly, all the way along until we get to this nice fold on the other side. And I'm going to put a pin. I'll put a pin right there inside that fold. And that didn't go far enough, so let's just do that. Okay, now just like what I did with the elastic, is I'm going to match that pin to my crotch seam, or my inseam seam, where my fold was. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to just carefully walk the edges of the fabric along each other until I get to another fold. And I'll put a pin there. Then make sure I've still got my pin here matched. You could actually pin them together if you want, but you'll have to unpin them. So just carefully match your cut edges, and I'll pin it. I've got here a nice fold here. And what this does, now we have 4 equal parts. Let me fold this out so you can see this. Okay. So maybe I'll go ahead and put a pin here so you can see it. This is the fold that we used as a starting point. And now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pins and all 4 different areas. So now I'm going to take one of my leg opening elastics, and I'm just going to do one of these in the video, and just repeat the process for the other leg opening. So I'm going to take this area right here, and I'm going to match it to one of the pins. Now, I don't like to match it, of course, here in the front, it will be a little bit thicker. I don't want to match it here because I've got a seam here, and that will cause a lot more thickness. And here in the middle of the buttocks isn't probably a great place for that. It's a little bit more noticeable. I like to put it here somewhere along the side area. So I'm going to put it here. So now I'm going to open this up here. This is where I want to put it. So let me see, let me see if I can turn this inside out so that you can kind of see what I'm doing, if it will be easier. I don't know what's going to be easier, how you really need to see this. So this is the pin that I want to match it to. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to match that stitching up with that pin, and I can actually use that pin. If it doesn't go through, if you don't like the way it pinned, you can put it lengthwise like that. Okay, and then all I'm going to do is kind of come around, and I'm going to match all of the other pins. Now, I could probably pull this suit around this way. I just want to make sure that you can see this the way you need to do this. Match each pin, the elastic pins to the garment body pins of the leg opening. And I'm just kind of walking this around. And there should be some stretch. You're going to be stretching the elastic as you sew it on. Just know that the measurements that I give you on the pattern our suggestions. It's about a 2-inch difference between the garment leg opening and the elastic leg opening. If you like your elastic to be tighter, then of course you can lessen the amount of elastic. If you need it to be a little bit less elasticized, then you can do less elastic. So you can see here that the elastic in this area, the garment is larger. So what you're going to do when we get into the machine, you're going to stretch the elastic so it matches the size of that fabric as we sew. And I am going to, I think, am I going to put the elastic on the bottom? Yeah, I think I'm going to put the elastic on the bottom. Or maybe I'll do it this way. I tend to change my mind a lot about when I'm doing this. So you can see the elastic stretching. I'll do the elastic on the top. And I will probably start, if I'm going to do it this way, I'll probably start just before the where the stitch line is for the elastic. Okay, so I'm back and I've got the leg elastics installed, and I actually, let me just kind of smush that down a little bit so you can see what's going on here. So I actually did both leg elastics for you in that little quick sped up video because I kind of remembered why I like putting the elastic on the bottom. And I feel like sometimes it gives me a little bit more control about where the top fabric goes on the elastic. You do have to do some manipulation using your hand. You got to pull from the back while you're feeding the fabric through. So it requires, you know, a hand to be, some fingers to be behind the presser foot and fingers in front of the presser foot, kind of helping the fabric move along. Because remember, you're stretching the elastic toward you, you're pulling the elastic toward you, so you got to help the fabric move along. So that's just a personal preference. Practice on your own to find out what works for you. All right, so now I am ready to put the waistband elastic in, and the same thing as before, we're going to divide the waistband into fourths. So I'm going to take that center seam, fold that on the center front seam, and carefully fold it toward the back. Now usually you would have like a notch on the pattern that identifies the center back, but most of my patterns are cut on the fold, so it's hard to identify the notch. So we just fold it in half. Of course, you could cut out a notch if you would like for the center back. All right, so now I'm just going to take that pin and match it to the center front seam and gently walk the edges, just like I did with the leg opening elastic. The waistband elastic isn't as difficult to apply as the, although getting these pins in the fabric can be challenging. Isn't as doing the waist elastic isn't as challenging as the leg openings. But the more you do this, the more you'll get comfortable. And sometimes, you know, most of the time when I make stuff for myself or friends, I don't even measure the elastic. I just know how much to stretch while I'm putting it on. Okay, so there's my fourth. So now all I need to do, I'm going to turn this inside out. I think it might be easier for you. So this is the center back. Right here, this is the pin for the center back. So I'm going to match my seam here on the elastic to that center back. And I'm going to put the elastic on the bottom again, so my pins will need to be on the top and this is the direction they need to go in. And then I'm just walking this around to match all of the other pins. Now, if you have pins like I do, they're going down this way, make sure that you take these out and that you don't forget to remove them before you go in that serger. It will mess up your knife. You'll have to replace the knife. And so I'm matching this pin here to the center front. And on around, this is the last one I have to match, I believe. But I'll get that matched. Okay, so there, I've got that pinned. Now, if you feel like you need to, when you stretch this, you could put a pin in between your pins in the widths between. But a lot of times I get into the machine, I get started and I stretch and I just kind of hold on to it until I get to that spot. So I'm going to stitch on the elastic and I'll be right back. Okay, so we have the waistband elastic on, and now we're ready to turn everything. So I'm just going to turn this, and when you turn your waistband elastic over to the inside, make sure that it's nice and flush with the elastic up here. We don't want any extra fabric beyond that elastic, so make sure that you got it nice and flush and fold it straight down. Be careful that you're not twisting it in any way. So you want to fold it straight down on that. And I'm going to go ahead and pin this. And this will be in the direction I'm sewing. So it's going to go in like this. For me, I can see this. It's going to go, the stitching is going to go this way so I can pull the pins out. So I just walk around. Where's my other mark? I like to fold it on the marks that I had before first. And then if I need to go back on that, whoops, my pin just broke. Okay, and then I'm here at the center front. So again, this is a hard one because it's so thick right there. And I like to pin it, you know, close to the bottom. I'm getting out of frame here. Close to where the serging stitching is, because that's where my stitching is going to go. The other mark, basically the side seam. Okay, and then, you know, I'm going to feel my way. Do I want to do another pin here? I may as well kind of pin between them. I want to make sure this is nice and flat. So the way I designed these is that the elastic really should not be that much smaller than your the waist on this. So you shouldn't be stretching a whole lot. So one of the things that you have to look out for is this thickness here on this little side seam here. You'll have to kind of work that. Now remember, it's going to be a diagonal, so you may need to stretch just a little bit to get that folded over so that this is nice and flush here at the edge. And then when you go through your machine, whether you're using your cover stitch machine or a zigzag, you'll probably have to just help it through the machine at this point because there's a lot of thickness there. Now if you're going to use a zigzag stitch, I would suggest using the 3-step, and then that way you will have less miss or skipped stitches. That's what I would suggest. So I'm going to do the same thing over here on this side, kind of stretch it out a little bit, kind of walk my fingers up this way. Make sure this edge is nice and flush, and then pin it. That's good. And then also notice here we have the buttonhole here, which is perfect placement. Okay, I'm going to do I need to do one more pin? No, that's fine. Now when I start this for the waistband, I'll do the waistband and then I'll come back and we'll do the leg openings, because it's just right now there are a lot of pins in it. So I don't usually like to start. I'm slurring my words now. At the center back. Sometimes I do. Usually I'll start over kind of on the side, so it's not so noticeable, just in case I can't get on top of those stitches when I come back to it. Just in case. You know, it's a better place to hide it than the center back. So I'm probably gonna start like. Let me put a pin. I'll start like right maybe around here. That's kind of the side of the back. Okay, so I'm going to do that in my cover stitch, and then I will be right back. Okay, so I've got the waistband elastic on, and so we're really close. Now, one thing before I turn over the waist elastic, you should know is, I mean the leg opening elastic, is I don't usually pin this. Like, I turn it and then pin it. I don't usually do that. It's just too many pins, and then I find that I keep sticking myself. So because it's so narrow, I just kind of turn it as I go, kind of stretch it and turn it as I go. And then feel with my thumb where the edge is. Now, before I do that though, remember that I did this basting stitch in the front here, and I need to be able to stretch this. So I'm going to actually remove that now before I do that stitching. And you know, I don't remember if I actually used a long stitch. I mean, the stitches are fairly long. If you just cut a few places, then you can actually pull out easier. Okay. And sometimes if we can see it here, I just don't want to rip the fabric. Comes out really, you just clip it. Take short pieces and just grab that end. I'm sure you are all well versed in ripping stitches out, so. All right, let me get this other side done. And like I said before, I just turn it as I go. And again, you're gonna see the top instead of the bottom, because I'm using my cover stitch. Now, anywhere I use a cover stitch, of course, you can use a zigzag stitch. I mentioned previously that I prefer the 3-step zigzag stitch. That way you won't, you'll have less skipping stitches if that happens. Okay, so where do I start? I'm gonna actually start about here. This is where I started with the elastic with the serger. So I'm going to start there, and I'm just going to kind of stretch as I go, kind of feeling the evenness as I go. So maybe I'll just go ahead and put a pin there so you can see that I'm starting there. And again, when you turn it as you're pulling and stitching, you're going to have to pull from behind and then make sure that your edge is flush with the elastic. Okay, folks, we are there. The last thing we need to do is install the drawstring if you chose to put a drawstring in. Now, this should be on the pattern, but the drawstring, I think I just simply say to cut 10 to 12 inches longer than your waist measurement. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me flip this inside out because we have to open up this buttonhole. And if you've never opened a buttonhole before, at the opposite end, it's always a good idea to close that off with a pin. That's so when you're using your seam ripper or anything else, you don't accidentally cut the whole thing open. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dig here just in between my stitching there. Try not to grab the stitches. And you just want that top layer of fabric. Make sure that you're not getting any of the elastic. So cut through. Once you have a small opening and you're cut through that lining and everything, I usually just like to use my scissors or snips and just kind of trim through. And you just need a small hole. You just need to make sure that the hole, and you see that paper that we used is coming out. We just need the small hole that's going to, we're going to be able to insert the drawstring in. Okay, so now I've got my drawstring and I had to go hunting for mine. So again, 10 to 12 inches longer than your actual waist. And what I do, if you're using a polyester waistband, I tie them in a knot like that on both ends. It's right at the end. Now, if you're using polyester, like I was about to say, you can use a lighter. This is a lighter I've had. I don't smoke anything, and I just kind of melt it back so it doesn't continue to fray. And just watch, make sure it doesn't turn black. Okay, let that cool before you insert it here. So, in one of the ends, you're gonna pierce straight through one of those knots. And then you're gonna insert the safety pin into the hole, and depending on, doesn't matter what side you go through, and then you just fish it through. Doesn't really take that long. And then I will just go ahead and speed all the video up because I don't know what else I can talk about. Okay, so I'm back all the way around, and what I need to do is I need to kind of make these even. Now, if you realize that you cut off, you know, more drawstring that you need, then of course you can cut off your other end. But remember, you're going to stretch this onto your body to get it onto you. So just make sure that you have enough that it doesn't go back inside. So I'm going to pull out some more, pull here, and then hold this, and then push all the fabric around so that some of this other string gets eaten up. And that's probably pretty good. I'm actually going to cut this side off. Tie another knot. You don't want too much drawstring. Then it'll get wrapped around you on the inside. Okay, good. Okay. So there we are. We've got this all done. It's a new swimsuit. I call this the Stealth. I don't know why, the word was there, and so I call this the Stealth. This looks similar to some of my other suits. I will tell you though, we'll kind of pull this to the side. There is a little bit more room for you there in the front if you need more room. If you don't, let me grab the pattern. Where did I see the pattern? If you like this style and you don't need so much room in the front, you can just shave off some of the bottom here. Maybe if you're a medium, shave it from here, going from here, the waist, into the small size, and then shave off a little bit of the front and come back up to nothing about where the notch is. That's how you can take away some of the fullness. But this actually looks pretty nice. It has a straighter rear end here. So there you have it, your Stealth bathing suit, and I will see you in the wrap-up. Okay, and there you have it. That is your stealth brief, all put together. Now, I do know that I probably make a big deal about something that is actually pretty easy to sew together, but I just want to make sure that for the beginners, they get the most of the information, or as much information as they have to make this. So I do only line the front. You can, of course, line the back of the suit as well, but just be advised that if you do that, if you're actually swimming, you may get some drag, which means that it's a little bit tougher for you to swim in. Now, I do want to mention that with this and one of my other pattern releases that I released about the same time, you do get the written and sewing instructions. They are illustrated, but they aren't as complete as my sewing tutorials. So just be advised by that. So I hope this sewing tutorial has helped you out. Maybe you've learned a technique or something new that you didn't know before. That's what I'm here for. That's what I enjoy doing. So I hope you make a lot of these suits. If you do, post those pictures on your Instagram and tag me at Robert Joseph Sewing. I would really love it. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. It helps me out. And thank you again for watching, and be well.